See, there is another point that in planning water utilization of rivers, that these pharaohs did about 3,000 years ago has to be taken into account, called the hydraulic ram. It is a intake at a high level along the stream flow, river flow, and then narrowing it down to a point so that a pressure is built up, and then the water is over the banks. Now that was done to irrigate the western desert in Egypt. Now I wonder why in India all these water specialists have never paid attention to that, because we could easily do that to most of our rivers. Now even in Narmada, when we are doing, I'm slightly digressing for the benefit of our own knowledge, that hydraulic ram system, which was developed 3,000 years ago to irrigate the western desert in Egypt, has not even been considered. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to reduce the river flow, but you're going to only use it for a certain purpose instead of having a high dam that we have come into to build for 30 years and the next generations benefit, if at all. I just wonder if, Professor, you could tell us, is there any scheme where hydraulic rams are going to be taken up?
No, you are very right that there is a need of, picking up a good technology from elsewhere and perhaps contextualize it to a local condition. In fact, not going to Egypt or not directly answering your question, I feel a lot of traditional technology which are even available within river system like in the northeast, which can be reinforced and other value addition can be done, which can provide better solution than kind of some top-down technologies being brought in there. So there's no harm even looking at the Egyptian example and then see that how perhaps we can make it contextual to the Himalayan river system, which I'm sure is much different from the Egyptian rivers. So one has to really look into the details. It will not be a very oversimplistic solution, but obviously we always talk about best available technology or best management practices. So one has to really see that how it makes sense to our kind of need and the context.
Good afternoon. I am Shalin Singhal from TERI. Congratulations to Dr. Mahanta for such a wonderful, informative presentation. I would just like to bring attention to a small issue that you had touched briefly. See, one of the major challenge for the rivers dying is the contribution of waste and sewage from upstream cities, and that's where you had touched earlier also briefly. I would just like the significance of this micro level planning within the cities, particularly focusing on the micro watersheds and the drainage catchments. So it links to the previous point of not only decentralized institutional planning, but also decentralized physical and environmental planning, looking at those micro watersheds within the cities, particularly focusing on small drainage catchment, which are these drains within the cities, and focusing on the issues of access to sanitation and sewerage on that population which is along those drainage catchments. Thank you.
I hope I could get you. Essentially, this whole national, river restoration and conservation is all around that. How we manage our sewage. You see, for instance, the drinking water supply project that is coming up in my city in Guwahati. There are 3 projects coming up, and by 2040 there will be 600 MLD water supply. So every day we'll have 600 million liter of water coming to the city. As of now, the city people mostly depend on the groundwater. They pump groundwater from different tube wells and consume, and that goes out as a wastewater. Now, here is a case where, apart from the groundwater that is contained in the subsurface in the city and also the runoff that happened during the monsoon, 600 million liters a day new water from the river is coming to the city. Where does it go? It's suddenly, increasing this whole mass balance. Now, if you do not plan your drainage system and the stormwater system properly, if you do not develop your sewage system projecting that 600 million liter extra, you have a huge problem there. And right now, as we all know, most of the Indian cities do not have a proper sewage system, at least house connection. So this is a huge issue. There are STPs, as you know, right now, they are not functioning properly. Most of them have failed because after 3 years, when it is handed over to the urban local bodies, they do not take over in true sense and it starts faltering, and finally, your input-output, there is no difference. So under the Ganga River Basin Authority plan, we are now, the groups that IIT Consortia is now suggesting that this has to change, and probably irrespective of what technology, what operational mode like PPP and all that, the vendor will also be the operator for 15 years. So we are now looking at 15 years life cycle cost assessment. Maybe it is a SBR technology or MBR technology, MBBR technology, or activated sludge. And we have worked out, some of our colleagues have spend time on that typically for per MLD you have like 200 lakhs rupees per year, so, or 200 lakhs rupees for maybe 15 or whatever. So that amount is now comparable in terms of energy costs, in terms of initial investment, capital investment, and particularly the operation and maintenance, because the O&M cost generally are borne by the state ULBs and they are reluctant to get a very high O&M cost. That is why it is failing. So what is being proposed now, that this O&M cost from whatever source it comes, either it's part of the whole project itself, so that per MLD, if you have a 200 MLD, maybe 400 crores rupees of lifetime cost of the project for 15 years are invested, and for 15 years, the ULBs or the people who are concerned are only concerned about the output of that wastewater system, how good that is. That quality will be controlled and quality assurance will be provided. And we have a good, robust system for 15 years, no headache, no other worry. I think it's a very paradigm shift from the government perspective. I hope it is adopted. It is being recommended now. And then, maybe a better sewerage treatment system will come up. And they have given leverage that even we are not talking about whether a particular urban body will have a SBR or a MBBR. Because for system like membrane bioreactor, the lifetime cost is about 400 lakhs per MLD. Compared to an activated sludge or a aeration lagoon system, which is just about couple of lakhs rupees per MLD. So one has to really take a very conscious decision what it will be. But I guess eventually it is a whole connected again system of water supply, drinking water supply, stormwater management, wastewater treatment, sewerage treatment. You have to think in terms of the overall water management of an urban system. Otherwise, if they remain discrete, again, there is a whole connectivity problem coming up, and it will not going to work in terms of a sustainability part. Thank you.
Yes.
My concern is quality of
Please identify yourself.
myself, Dr. MPC,
Please. Actually, I used to see the data from the Bihar, West Bengal, and Assam. This region, even including Bangladesh, the groundwater continuation is very high regarding the arsenic. And the maximum populations are dependent on the groundwater or hand pump, even during the rainy season or dry season, both seasons. And another is this flood zone. So recharging is very high. Remain the concentration is very high. Why? That's one of my queries. First. Second, is it any solution? This area having groundwater contaminated by the arsenic. And this area is the flooded area. Assam to the Bihar, this whole region having the groundwater contamination by the arsenic. So even having the flooded zone, remain its contamination is very high. What is the reason behind it? And is it any solution in the future which can reduce this arsenic contamination in ground?
You see, our subsurface investigation is definitely not adequate, but we do know during the flooding, it brings down sediments ranging from coarse sand to fine clay. So when they get deposited, and due to the flooding also, there is sometime remobilization of these materials. So you can have within the floodplain area, there are heterogeneity. Somewhere there may be a clay pocket, somewhere there may be silt, and even in the aquifer also, as you go to the subsurface, the different aquifers could be maybe the first water table could be directly amenable for infiltration, which generally is free from arsenic, the shallow aquifer. But generally we find that from about depth of 50 feet to about 200 feet is the area where you get a great deal of arsenic. And beyond that, and then again, in deeper aquifer, we don't have as much. There are, of course, now recent studies showing that even deeper aquifer are also getting contaminated. And it has a whole deal of issue involved because, number one, the arsenic is apparently leaching out from natural material because there are not too many industries where these are happening, particularly in the Brahmaputra floodplain. The non-happening of in some places, essentially it could be because of the hydraulic conductivity. For instance, if there is a clay barrier, obviously it is cutting out the flow, the water plume, even containing arsenic, cannot go vertically as well as laterally. That is one part. Number two, it is possible that some areas where pumping is very heavy because of lateral flow from the subsequent aquifer or even a vertical liquid aquifer, sometimes some adjoining aquifer also can get affected. So there is a whole issue of developing a good three-dimensional understanding of the subsurface vis-a-vis the material in terms of whether it is coarse sand, which is a very good aquifer with good hydraulic conductivity so that the water can flow very freely for a long distance. But the areas are so heterogeneous, and particularly I have only a hunch that because of the seismicity, there is also a lot of great upheaval of the sediment. So you have a whole locationalization of some areas where there are clay deposits, where the water flow is hardly happening at all. So even an adjoining aquifer, we have found arsenic. On one side of the road is a very high arsenic aquifer. The other side of the road, there is no arsenic at the same depth. So there has to be some sort of a flow barrier in terms of hydraulic conductivity. And the hydraulic conductivity in a natural situation can mostly happen because of the particle size. If there are a lot of clay barriers, it will definitely inhibit the flow. That could be one answer, but it is almost kind of clear that this whole paleo channel is releasing arsenic to the groundwater based on all the studies around. And the older alluvium, which are much deeper, because they have already leached out a great deal of their arsenic into the water, they are no longer releasing more arsenic to the deeper aquifer. But the shallower aquifer, where you have still a more recent alluvium, are still having a lot of arsenic-bearing minerals, which are still kind of capable of releasing under geochemical and organic condition of more arsenic to the aquifer. I mean, that's a very, very broad kind of a perspective that people generally believe. But as you know, there is a whole deal of people working on the arsenic problem and coming up with different theories. Still, I don't think anybody has, after billions of dollars spent on different conferences, we still don't have a complete answer, really.
Yes.
Just one observation. I'm glad to know that you are part of that IIT consortium, which is looking at Ganga basin management. This whole thing about sewage and how to manage sewage. One aspect which, at least whatever I have studied, it has not been looked into. After all, the water that comes out of the sewage treatment plant, if the sewage treatment plant is still working, is water. And there is no botheration what happens to this water, where it goes, because all the emphasis is on what is the quality that is coming in, how it is being treated, and then there is no botheration what happens to that water. I think our sewage treatment plants and all this processes, the issue about governance can get addressed if a stake is created on the water that comes out of the sewage treatment plant. Today there is no stake on that water. That water is seen, okay, and that is allowed to flow out either to a river, to a stream, or wherever. So I think within this system, if there is a very targeted creation of stake on that water, stake by industry that is mandated to use only that water, stake on non-potable uses, which is mandated to use only that water, then these stakeholders will ensure that the STPs work. They will ensure that they are working with the efficiency with which they have been created. So I think this is very important to look at what happens to the water that comes out of the STPs, and there may be a solution.
In fact, it has been recommended this time. I should clarify that I am not directly part of the consortia because of other commitments, but we are keeping track of what is coming out. It is being now suggested as this new plan that sewage have to be treated beyond secondary to tertiary level also, number one. And all the output that is coming out of the tertiary treatment, it should not go back to the water system. It should be actually used for instance, land application and other kind of thing, you know. So this has been recommended. The details are being still worked out. And that is a very valid point. Otherwise, so far the ULBs has never been given any priority to sewage treatment because apparently there is no benefit coming out of it. Unlike, you know, road or other infrastructure happening under, say, JNURM and other projects also. So obviously, it will be partly also kind of showing that after all sewage treatment is giving a benefit as well as for, say, city gardens and others for, as you said, non-potable use. And as well as, you know, there should also be a need of a creation of that sort of a demand that the water coming out of the sewage treatment plants should not get back to the natural system. This is being actually part of the recommendation. Yes.
I don't see any more hands raised. Actually, we still have time, but there are no hands raised, so perhaps we can wind up the discussion. We've had an extremely interesting presentation. I quite agree with what Professor Chaturvedi was saying. It's an excellent presentation. And I do hope hard copies will be available for you. So I have not taken any notes because I thought I could depend on your hard copy. And do please send me a written paper for eventual publication. One other thing I wanted to mention, that since we were discussing the Brahmaputra, China and so on, there is going to be an international conference in IIC on 18th and 19th of November on Asian rivers. And it's going to include people from all the countries, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, China, the Mekong countries, and also people from the United States, Canada, UK, and so on. It's really going to be a big, and plenty of people from China. And that will be around 18th, 19th November. I think it's going to be a very interesting presentation. And people will be there from Nepal also, though strictly speaking, Nepal is not concerned with the Brahmaputra. But the whole region, yes. So I thought I would, apart from that, in this series, there will be a particular program in November. But in addition to that, on the 18th, 19th, there is going to be this conference. And on one of those evenings, 18th evening, we are going to have a presentation on the Bagmati by Deepak Gyawali and Ajay Dikshit of Kathmandu. I thought I would give you advance notice of this, so some of you might want to join. I think we will now bring this to a close, yes. Thank you very much. You deserve excellent...
Could I be included in that invitation? Is that possible?
Which invitation? No, you can come on. Anything in the IIC is open to everybody.
Oh, it is going to be here.
Yes.